I'm going to advance to the next slide. Now you can hit record.
Ready. Nice to
Okay.
see you.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're kicking off Research Development's Proposal Development Workshop Series. This is this year a 14-part series designed to support early career researchers get comfortable with the proposal process. And there's a lot of the topics will be focused specifically on proposal development. There will also be specialty topics sprinkled throughout the year. I had the schedule up beforehand, and we'll see it again at the end of the presentation. Today, we're starting off with research, landscape, and strategy. I'm joined by my colleagues, Haley Bahal and Catherine Chen, and we will be discussing understanding the funding landscape, your personal funding landscape, and how to kind of establish that. Haley will be talking about the importance of review, and then we'll have some breakout discussion rooms to discuss today's topic. So Catherine and I, I'm not sure if Catherine's on yet. She's returned from an appointment and should be joining by the time it's her turn to speak. We are part of the strategic intelligence team within research development, and we're going to be talking about understanding the funding landscape. If you are a new researcher, again, the PDW series is designed for early career researchers. If you have applied for one grant or are thinking about applying for your first grant, or maybe you've even applied for 3, you may feel like you're trapped in quicksand as you figure out what the process is and how to work out a budget and are you funding the right time, and you have 3 weeks to get it in. So what we're really talking today about is how to kind of back up and do some legwork before you're applying for an opportunity to help you be more prepared and to be able to put your best foot forward and know that you're looking in the right place for funding, and to know you're working with the right sponsors and the right program so that you have a higher probability of success. So the first place to really start is who will fund my work. And this is more general, maybe not a specific project, but who is interested in my work. And there's a host of federal sponsors. Those are often the easiest ones to make your first proposal to, because there's a wealth of information about what they want. But it can also be daunting because it's the federal government and there's a lot of paperwork to do. And but there may be foundations or the private sector. There's a lot of different sponsors. How do you go about finding who will fund your work? It's a multi-part process. You want to understand the sponsors. So sponsors are kind of like an employer. They're giving you money for a project. So you want to know who you're working for and whether you align with what they want to do, and if it's a good match. And then after that, you want to understand their programs. Which ones are a good fit for you? Which ones are maybe something that you can apply for now versus applying for in the future? And how do you develop those building blocks to become more competitive, maybe not now, but in 3 to 5 years for a bigger award? And that's part of the strategy goal of putting this together, and not starting from the process of what money is available now, but what money or what programs can I see myself fitting into over the next year to get a solid start and a higher comfort level with the process. And just as a note there, our next PDW will be on looking at programs and opportunities and how to use tools to find currently open solicitations or ones that are coming up. When we talk about understanding sponsors, I mentioned, it's like a job interview in a sense of you want to know who you're working for and whether you're a good fit. So you want to know what their goals are, and again, finding that proper fit, and so that you can make the best case on why you're being funded for the work that they want to do. We're going to talk a lot. I think in this presentation, we'll mention a lot National Science Foundation, and it's because they're the most transparent. They may not be the applicable sponsor for everyone that's here today, but it's an excellent place to get an understanding for some of these processes and understand how they can be applied to other sponsors as well. We'll talk about other sponsors also. But if we look at the organizational structure, at the federal level, NSF is a good example because they are a grant-making body. That's what they do. where other agencies, say like Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Department of Justice, they all fund research at different levels, but they're not the entire organization. So if you understand the structure and who are the funding entities within that, you know where to look for more information so that you can prepare yourself in the future. And part of that is understanding what their priorities are. Again, on the research side, this may be a little easier if you're in the arts, humanities, social sciences. It may not be as explicit, but it's still a way of doing, again, laying that foundation for knowing whether you're in the right place. So if you find those priorities and then seeing what the money flow is like. So we'll talk about some of the tools to find that. That can be the budgets. And finding how the money flows in the organization. Who are the entities that are getting money, more money, what's being cut back. So a lot of this may not be fun, but it, again, provides you an understanding of the sponsor so that you know if you're in the right place, what are the good opportunities, the best opportunities, how to maybe morph your research to fit their needs, and to find those opportunities, again, that aren't necessarily now, but maybe coming, so that you have not 4 weeks to prepare, but 4 months to prepare, or maybe even more time than that. So again, you can, most of the federal agencies have strategic plans. They all have budgets, and screening those as you do this process, you'll get more comfortable with it. And where it's not a major commitment of time, it's more of an, a check, because like budgets come out once a year, obviously that morphed. And as you advance in your career, you can also rely on press and media releases for what the projects are, because those may be focused on bigger projects. But this all gives you an idea of what the sponsor wants, because if they're giving you money, you want to know what they want. And it also helps you make that determination between sponsors who will fund ideas versus ones who will fund projects and have specific needs. So this is kind of easiest to see with NSF, which is, again, can be very open-ended on research, where sponsors like Department of Defense or NASA are very mission-oriented and want a specific thing. So that's another way of understanding the sponsor, to know that you're willing to address their specific needs. And if Catherine is here, I will hand it off to her. If she is not, I will continue.
I'm here.
Okay, great.
I'm here. Thanks, Keith. And wonderful. Okay, so now that Keith has talked a little bit about how you can begin to narrow down from that really broad field of sponsors, let's talk about what you can do once you have identified some sponsors and you're interested in specific programs. And of course, a really fundamental question here is, am I applying to the correct program? Because sponsors have their broad goals, but they're trying to achieve those goals in, separate concrete chunks with each different program. So it's really important to understand the specific goals of a program, and you want to do that in order to make your research question and topic a good fit for that specific program. Okay, so next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this might seem a little obvious, but I do encourage you, if you're interested in a particular program, to start with the program page. So the program page, you should think about it as the sponsor has already put all the information that they want you to know in one given spot. And sometimes we see that, you might not be up for an NSF career, you might not be eligible yet, or you might not be thinking about applying, but you can begin to look at these program pages and to get a good idea about what they're requiring, particularly for programs where you realize like they're not actually changing very much from year to year. And on these program pages is oftentimes where you're going to find links to the webinars and office hours, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little more detail, as well as the actual solicitations. So even if a solicitation is old, if it's something that a program that's going to repeat in the future, it's worth taking a look at that now, right? So you can begin to understand the specifics of what they're looking for. Can you click? Thank you. And also, the really important thing about reading a solicitation is to check that you're eligible. So it might seem self-evident, but sometimes, we see that people don't realize they're not eligible for something. So please read the solicitation in detail. Program pages also have contact info for the program officers. So one way to get to have FaceTime with the program officers is to actually attend those webinars and office hours that they've set up for a given program. Different agencies go about different ways of making this more or less transparent to you. But if you are interested in something specifically, go ahead and just type in, NEH office hours and then see, because there are a lot of different types of webinars and office hours. And I want you to think like webinars and office hours are not just a chance for you to hear from the mouths of program officers. So these are the people who actually know best what these programs are trying to achieve. You'll hear from them about what the goal really is, and you can get to ask questions. And also another thing that you might not think about is this is where everybody else is potentially asking questions in an open forum. So I do think these are really useful to begin to think about what your potential competition is also considering as they look to apply to these programs. And a quick program officer 101. So, make sure when you contact them that you already have an idea for what you're interested in pitching to their specific program. So by the time you get in contact with them, you should already be like, oh, I'm going to pitch this specific topic. And to me, it's clear why that aligns with the program that as they're advertising it, right? So make sure you show them that you've done that legwork. I know sometimes they provide phone numbers for program officers, but go ahead and just email them to set up an appointment. That gives them more time to prepare and actually read any materials that you send. And when you email them, you're requesting a Zoom or phone appointment and to actually meet, right? And please make sure to follow up with them after you have this wonderful conversation where you talk about everything the program wants to fund and how you're pitching how your work is perfectly aligned with that. And or trying to understand what you need to change to make your work align with that. So that's the key goal, of course, of reaching out to them. But I also want to highlight that you should be thinking about how you can build a relationship with program officers. So oftentimes they're going to continue to be at this agency, potentially continue to be at this specific program. And you want your name to be something that comes up when they're thinking about, oh, I'm thinking about a researcher that does cool work in X. And you want them to have a good opinion of you. So this is part of that. And another strategy that I want to highlight here for understanding programs well is to actually go and check out past awards. So I've linked in this PowerPoint a few different places where you can find past awards for specific sponsors, oftentimes on the program page. And one of the key things that you might be thinking about is who are the other PIs who are getting funded via this program, right? And part of why you want to do that is to see how you are stacking up against them. So you at your current stage, right? There might be things like career stage. It might become really clear to you that these awards are really for later career folks and not early career, for example. And something else that you can think about as you look at past awards is, are any of these people in my own network? If so, are these people that I can reach out to? Because actually talking to people who have had experience with the program is going to be really valuable to help you understand what you need to be doing and what your proposals need to actually look like. And something else you may consider as you look at past awards is actually the institutions that these PIs are at. So it might begin to give you an idea about how you compare at an institution like ASU relative to other folks who might be getting those awards. You might, for example, see that ASU doesn't really seem to be the target audience for a given program, for example. And of course, this is all tied in with, pitching your research to the sponsor in a specific program. But does your research question and topic actually align with what this program has previously funded? So you might see that they have demonstrated interest in this specific subfield. You might also see that they've funded the exact project that you're looking to pitch, right? Maybe if they did that last year, and that should really inform how you are going to structure a particular argument for why you should receive funding to do something similar, right? You might want to choose to differentiate yourself a little bit more. And lastly, sometimes you can find published data on how competitive an actual program is. So you can find success rates sometimes. And this is something that you may want to keep in mind as you begin to think about whether you should apply to something, whether it's a strategic use of your time. And again, I've already highlighted that through past awards, you can find past awardees. You may also just be aware of folks in your network who have applied, but not necessarily gotten it. But I do encourage you to talk to those people so they can give you any advice they might have in terms of approaching this program, what they would do the same or differently. They might also be willing to share the feedback that they got throughout the review process. And if you find that you have a good rapport with them or know them well, they might actually be willing to share their proposals, which can be extremely valuable. So now that I've talked a little bit about how to understand the sponsors, how to understand the programs, and how past awards tie into that, let's turn to talking a little bit about how you can use that along with strategy and planning ahead in order to hopefully help set you up in terms of a well-funded research career. So next slide, please. And one more click. Thank you. Okay, so again, I just want to drive home the point of fit here. So you want to understand those key sponsors and those key programs so that you can, and you can anticipate that those opportunities are going to be coming up. And another key thing here is, of course, differentiation. One more click. Thank you. Differentiation is understanding how you can stand out from your competition. So a bunch of other early career folks who maybe might sound like they're pitching something similar. It's important to understand what they might be pitching, but also how you can pitch something that is like even more specifically targeted to what that sponsor and that unique program wants to fund. And this all fits into planning. And I'm aware that this is seems a little broad. And of course, it's because what you choose to prioritize is going to be different depending on everybody's different set of circumstances and research interests. But what we're really trying to drive home here today is just how important it is to apply as intentionally, not opportunistically as possible, excuse me. And the reason we're saying this is because, we see sometimes that folks are just applying super reactively to things as they come up and or spending all their time sending out a bazillion different different proposals, and they're not funded. And the reason for that is because these folks haven't necessarily taken the time to align what they're actually pitching to what people want to fund. So it's really important to begin to prioritize those programs, as I mentioned. And part of that too is to begin to understand how you can allocate your limited time to developing these, fairly time-intensive, resource-intensive proposals. Another thing you want to keep in mind is if you want to go after specific programs and specific sponsors, you can think about now is the time to begin building those relationships, not just with program officers, but also potentially with collaborators that you might need in order to pursue certain types of awards. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Keith.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So I'm just going to give a quick example from NSF, again, on how you can kind of take a look at programs and figure out what is a good fit for you. So if you go to NSF's page and look at their About Us, there will be a list of their directorates. There will be some other links. I just copied out these. These are the 8 primary directorates that will fund sponsored projects. And if you are in the natural sciences or engineering, there's some clear fits on where to start looking. If you're in social sciences or other areas, it may say like, well, I don't know what's a good fit. So one of like my personal interest, what I find interesting about NSF is the social and behavioral and economic sciences. Because when we look at that, again, that one, it is very wide ranging in the kind of topics that they are interested in. So this is a screen cap from the website. So when you look at the information on SBE, it lists what the 4 divisions are. And the one that I want to highlight today is social and economic sciences. When we look at social economic sciences, it gives a very kind of broad focus on what they're interested in. And when we look at the programs that they have, this isn't all of them. I selected primarily for how short they were. When we look at these topics, these are not research domain academic specific. They may lean towards having a tie to a specific academic field, but many of these are completely wide open and can come from at different angles. So this is why looking at what the program wants to do, you may find an opportunity that is not, you may not think of in your research. And because these are standing programs, the way that they may pop up on grants.gov and whatnot may be a little different. So the awareness of them and what their cycles are like, and going into these programs individually to say, hey, I'm doing something that I didn't think would be appropriate, but it actually does address this topic, because these are very topical oriented rather than kind of like a specific research approach. So when we look into that and we look at who has gotten these awards at ASU, from this specific division within NSF since 2018, we have 43 awards, and we see a lot of different colleges, a lot of different representation. So I think this can show the value of diving into those programs to find what fit you, because again, you can kind of prepare for it. And again, we're using NSF as an easy example because they are so transparent with their information. But this is the type of approach that can, again, be applied to other sponsors so that you can prepare yourself for what programs are a good fit for me, maybe not right now, but maybe in 6 months when that solicitation is open, or maybe in 3 years after I have a couple of proposals under my belt. It also gives you an idea of what kind of teams you might need to put together in order to be competitive for proposals. So if we look at law and science, if you're on the science side, you might need some law people on your team. And conversely, if you're in law, you might need some science people on your team. And this all, again, gives you some direction where you are not scrambling because the solicitation is due, your proposal is due in a month. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway that we'd like you to take from our part of the presentation is, how do you do a little bit of planning up front to find the best fit? And as Catherine said, make the best use of your time on what you're applying to and applying for it well, because you're being responsive to the needs and understanding what the needs of the sponsor are. And with that, I will turn it over to Haley to discuss the importance of review.
Thank you, Keith. And so now that you've analyzed your sponsor and thought about your strategy, you're probably thinking about writing your proposal. I'd like to also suggest that you should be thinking about reviewing your proposal and how the sponsor will review your proposal. Just as those preliminary steps that Catherine and Keith discussed make your proposal stronger, a clear understanding of the review process, along with a thorough and deliberate review of your proposal, makes it stronger and more competitive. One way you might approach reviewing your proposal is through a structured set of reviews. A common practice is called color team reviews. This style of review can be a way to improve the overall success of your planning and proposal development efforts. Shown here on the left are the common pink and red categories. The key takeaway here is that early planning and allowing ample time for significant review will help ensure your proposal is responsive and competitive. Simply sending your work to a peer prior to submission also improves your proposal. Another part of planning for your proposal development process is the editing portion. Editing is a separate, distinct function and is different from content review or compliance. During this review period as a whole, you'll make structural or logical changes to your text, reformulating arguments, and reordering information. During the editing portion, you can make more specific changes to things like sentence structure and phrasing to make sure your meaning is conveyed clearly and concisely. Next slide. Another element to think about is review structures. So how will your proposal be reviewed at the sponsor? Funding agencies use different processes for reviewing, and understanding how your proposal will be looked at should influence your strategy and response. Most federal agencies, like Keith was saying, have lots of information online available and have outlined their review process. And you can look at those details. I have links provided for you in this presentation to look at later. I'd like you to remember that reviewing, one slide back, please. I'd like you to remember that reviewing does not necessarily mean that the same thing as technical review, and that some sponsors include different levels of agency staff as part of the review process. Additionally, some philanthropic sponsors might review proposals for alignment with their organizational goals that are very different than federal sponsors. And those philanthropic sponsors often arrange for subject matter experts to review proposals for technical portions, but then funding decisions are made by non-technical staff or lay board members. Next slide. I'd like to highlight a few structures at some common sponsors. NSF, of course, is here. At NSF, program officers hold a significant role in approving proposals for funding. Reviewers are first selected and they're sourced from a variety of places, including references listed in the proposal, society programs, journal searches, and also recommendations from the proposer themselves in the suggested persons list. Also, proposers are allowed to suggest people who they would prefer not to review the proposal. After the scientific and technical and programmatic review, NSF program officers recommend whether the proposal should be declined or awarded. Next slide. At the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment Humanities staff and then a review council also take on an important role in the selection of proposals. Panel reviews are formed, then based on the evaluators' ratings and comments, staff recommends the most meritorious applications for the council to review. And then the council reviews those information, reviews the reviewer comments and provides details to the NEH chair, who then takes into account the totality of the advice and makes decisions. Next slide. This is a nice reminder that NEH, like other sponsors, go through regular structured changes. Right now, NEH has recommended some updates to their review process. The new framework is for their review criteria to move from 5 distinctly different sections to 3 factors. So I've taken this information here and provided lots of details in the comments for you to review the new NIH proposed structure. It's not formalized yet. Next slide. While structures and review systems vary at each sponsor, I want to highlight that there are significant overlap between sponsors when it comes to review criteria. Each sponsor might use different terminology, and then you should clarify and craft your proposal with that into consideration. But the information they're trying to get from you is very similar. I think one more click, please. Thank you. On this chart from an article titled, "How Do I Review Thee? Let Me Count the Ways," by Holly J. Falk-Krasinski and Stacy Tobin, you can see the breakdown of common criteria and what question that answers. I've linked the full article for you so you can review it and you can begin your proposal development and see how the criteria are very similar. Next slide. Another recommendation for you is to gain experience as a reviewer. Reviewers gain firsthand knowledge of the review process. They learn about common problems, discover strategies about how to write strong proposals, and through serving on a panel, you meet new colleagues in your field. Next slide. Of course, as the limited submissions person, I'd like to recommend that you serve as an internal reviewer for ASU's limited submissions process. This is a great way to participate here at ASU, and you can learn more about the internal reviewing and learn more about the research happening across the university. Please reach out to your research administrator or limited submissions at asu.edu for more information about that. That kind of wraps up for the review portion. I'd like to move on to the discussion part of this workshop. And I'd like you to take out a pen and paper or your phone or whatever if you want to type some notes. But the first part of this is to spend 1 minute, and I have a little timer here, to think about this discussion question. What opportunities do you see moving forward based on what you heard today? So think about all the things Catherine and Keith thought about, reviewing things. Spend 1 minute thinking about what opportunities do you see moving forward based on what you heard. Just 10 more seconds thinking about that. Okay, thank you for doing that, taking a little time to think. I'll break you into pairs where you can quickly introduce yourself and discuss your thoughts building on this reflection. Remember, this is quick. You only have 1 minute for each person. And when the 2 minutes are up, Zoom will add a few more folks to your room. we will do that right now. Let me click the Zoom button.
Haley, you can also stop the recording.
Yes, I will. Thank you.